All right, and we are live. Howdy, all. This is Kyle Whittington, and I'm here with Drew the Catholic. And today we are we're talking about just some of the things that you probably haven't heard from, in OCIA. We're specifically mostly talking to those who are joining the church here on this Holy Saturday. So I guess first off, congratulations. It's been a long and arduous journey. I'm sure there's been lots of struggles. There's been lots of doubts. There's been lots of possibly arguments with family, friends, for a lot of you, probably your wives or, your husbands or whoever. So, but I guess I just wanted to come in today and just kind of talk about some of the struggles that you're going to face. There's not, I don't know, like whenever I came into the church in 2010, there was a lot of things that I wasn't particularly prepared for. So yeah, Drew, do you have any initial thoughts?
Oh man, there's a whole. I mean, you could write books and books on this. I feel like in my experience as a convert, I was theologically more ready than I was practically, if that makes sense. Like that's the biggest thing for me is, especially today with all the content online. Anyone that's coming into the church, you're probably doing so in no small part because you've been watching, one of the bigger Catholic creators out there who's done an amazing job catechizing. And every catechist, every RCIA director I've talked to has found that to be true, that like, man, a lot of these people like already went through RCIA, at least as far as like doctrine goes, but the practical realities and really like the human parts of the church that we're not talking about on YouTube, like dealing with people in the parish and parish politics and all that. That was the biggest shock to me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's kind of funny because, yeah, there's definitely a lot of sinners in the church. And, I would be a saint if it weren't for all these, filthy sinners around me. So, but no. Yeah. So I guess, you mentioned church politics, but I guess that kind of leads into my first point. Point number one is that church leadership will fail you at every single level. The Pope is going to say something crazy, although you're probably familiar with that at this point. Especially like if you've made it to this channel, you're aware of that. But even like your local bishop, even your priest sometimes, and all of these guys might be good men, but they are going to fail you. The Pope may be infallible at times, but that doesn't make him impeccable. There's a lot of prudential judgments that you're going to see get wrong, and it's going to be confusing. And, you're going to be confronted with the reality that the church is not merely a museum of saints, though, we've got an entire liturgical calendar full of those. It is the hospital for sinners, and you are going to be confronted with that, and it's going to be tough. Yeah. So Drew, do you want to speak on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll never forget the first time I opened the hymnal book that we used at the time. We don't use it anymore, but there was a hymnal book that our church was using that literally had hymns in it that were banned by the USCCB, and it was still in our pew. So I was like, I remember seeing that and I was like, wait a minute, because I was a nerd enough to have read the document banning those particular hymns and hymns like it, but then our book had them, and I'm like, what? So that's a really common thing where there's like a disconnect, not in an actual way where it's like problematic of like, oh, the church is false, but like in a human way where like administratively someone who, just to be frank, probably didn't have the time or the concern for making sure the hymnal book was orthodox, just said, let's just buy one. That one looks good. Their website's fine. Buy it. Then all of a sudden there's, problematic hymns, right? And then some people like those hymns and think that's the direction that the church should go, even though it won't, because it's like heretical or whatever. That was what was shocking to me, is the reality of I might be excited to come into the faith for everything the faith actually offers, but not everyone in the pew agrees with that stuff, and they're coming to mass too. But how do I learn to charitably deal with that and live with that, knowing that that's going to be a struggle? And you can't simply just be like, oh, that person's a heretic. Like, okay, well, we have to be, frankly, that's your priest's job to deal with that person. But
Yeah.
you still have to go to mass with them and you still have to see them and be involved in the parish. You might
Mhm.
be working in the parish, in some sort of volunteer capacity with them or whatever. That doesn't go away, even though Catholicism has like doctrinal clarity and the Holy Spirit preserves the church.
Yeah.
Some like often miraculously so, which that's what I've taken it to mean is like, oh, I know that Christ guards this church in a way that other communions are not guarded. Like that's a huge feature of why I joined. And now instead of being like, oh, well, then it should be perfect. What I had to learn is, oh, I get to see that actually work out in real time.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. It's definitely a struggle, and yeah, so just I guess be ready for that. If you've been going through OCIA, chances are you're already familiar with a lot of this, but it's and I guess I would even say like don't expect it to change all that much um with the new pope. You're kind of new. Whenever I converted, Pope Benedict was still pope, but there were still struggles. There were still failings within leadership. And I mean, my goodness, St. Peter denied Christ 3 times. So, that was, Dr. Hahn always says, the chain's only as strong as its weakest link. And, the chain of the papacy started with the weakest link. So, yeah, it's just, yeah, I guess be prepared for that. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to post them in the chat, and we'll get to them. If you're watching on X, I probably won't be able to see your comments not until like after the stream is done. So if you want to head over to YouTube, we've got the live chat going there. You can post it in there. So, but yeah. So I guess yeah. What do you do with that? Like, let's say. Well, okay. Let's say the most relatable thing. Let's say the Pope says something crazy, and what do you do?
I think the most like with that one in specific, what I wish people would do is just go read the document first before even listening to you or I talk about it, right? Like this is a phenomenon in the whole world, but especially around big leadership figures where people who have an agenda will make a headline with what they said. And it might be fully representative of what they said and intended, or there might be surrounding context or things that are not being understood or communicated in that headline. So like the first thing is to get right to the horse's mouth, right? Like I want to read a papal document right from the horse's mouth, and then find a plethora of sources that I trust that I think are reasonable, that don't have an agenda to report on them if I need help, and try to get out of your echo chamber with that too. Like,
Yeah.
I think that's really important. Like try to honestly give like the other side a fair shake of whatever controversy there is. And we have, I mean, a lot of people don't know it. If you're in our server, you know it because it's in our rules. I forget what the citation is. You could probably hit us with it. But the catechism and canon law demands that in regards to other Catholics, we have a duty to treat them and to be as charitable as possible. So assume misspeaking or stupidity before malice, right?
Well, or even just assume orthodoxy, and
Right.
whenever you have ambiguity, assume the orthodox position. Don't assume heresy at everything. And the catechism reference you're talking about is Catechism of the Catholic Church 2478. And that's which is basically like every good Christian should be more ready to give a favorable interpretation to our neighbors' words and actions than an unfavorable one. So,
Right.
and you know what? Sometimes it's just like this is outside of my abilities. I can't see how this is good. Well, then you ask them. You ask them to explain it. You might find out, oh, they did mean the bad thing. Now, whenever it comes to the Pope and your bishops and stuff like that, chances are you don't have a good enough relationship with them to ask. And I guess for me, this is where I would say maybe stay in your lane. If you don't know the Pope well enough to go have a conversation with him, then it's probably not your place to go and try and correct him. I guess that gets a little murkier though, whenever it's just like, okay, you're talking to somebody. It's like, how could the Pope do something like this? It's like, well, I don't know, and
we've had worse.
yeah. Well, it's just like, well, is it my place to do this? Am I the one who's being called to do this? And like, I'll be honest with you guys, I don't have all the answers. I don't know. That's why I don't speak to them a lot. Last time we did was whenever Fiducia Supplicans dropped, and we did that live stream where we just
read the whole thing. Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I think too, like when you're coming in, you're usually escaping the madness of some other branch of Christianity revealing that it's wrong. In that, okay, I was a part of this denomination, now it's gone woke, they've changed their doctrine, or my pastor slept with the secretary and the whole church fell apart. That doesn't seem like a security from the Holy Spirit. One of the things I realized quickly, and when you're searching through history, this is like, oh, this is cool. When you have to live through history, it feels a little different. But the reality is, the safeguard of the Holy Spirit is in spite of human weakness, and in response to it, it doesn't block it at the front end always. Sometimes it does, like from the really pernicious stuff that would lead the faithful astray. Obviously, we know like an ex cathedra statement or an ecumenical council, that would be safeguarded on the front end. Like the Holy Spirit's not going to let them do something that's going to lead us astray. And that's the security we have that other denominations they can't even claim to have. But what we don't have complete safeguard from is human error in a capacity where the Holy Spirit allows it. So like the Pope speaking on a plane off the cuff to some journalist who asks a vague question, the man could misspeak, but you're not bound to that. So I would say one thing, like, learn the levels of fidelity and religious submission that are required of you, and learn to, like, as best you can, discern when that applies and when it doesn't. The other thing is, I think it's really helpful to keep, like you said, to kind of stay in your lane, but not just like, follow marching orders and don't ask questions. Like we're not LDS. We don't have to just shove our questions aside. We can ask genuine questions. But one thing I'm really concerned with is, what's the context I'm asking this question, and who am I asking it to? Is it a public forum where other people are going to be scandalized because they're just going to see what I ask or what I say or what I accuse and not delve into the full context? And then more than that, what you find throughout church history, and again, now we have the benefit of sometimes getting to live through this same principle, is the greatest saints always lived through periods of difficulty and crisis in the church, and were still faithful. I think about St. Francis of Assisi, notable time of decline in the church. That's why Jesus appeared to him and said, "Francis, rebuild my church," which he took literally, and then realized, oh, you mean a bit more than that. But for him to be St. Francis as we know and venerate today, he had to be in that time. He had to live through it. And so it's kind of like the Lord of the Rings quote, like, we don't get to choose the times we live in, just what we do with the time we have. Mm-hmm. If we're in a time where there's a crisis about X, Y, or Z thing, and you could take your pick right now, there's plenty. But am I going to just whine about the fact that I'm not living in a golden age of the church? Well, you could, but you're not going to be useful to yourself or others. Which I know is a strong statement, but that actually comes out of Vatican II in terms of discerning your personal apostolate. What's more sanctifying is, Lord, I'm going to be faithful to the church because I know through revealed religion, through intellect, through reason, as much as possible, I'm going to submit with religious fidelity to the teachings of the church. And I'm going to follow the wisdom of St. Padre Pio. How sweet is the hand that beats you when it's the hand of the church. If it's the hand of someone else, get away. But if it's the hand of the church, you kind of just, you know that if something is wrong in the capacity that it's allowed to go wrong in the church, you can never stray by being obedient, and God will reward you for that obedience. How many saints do we celebrate that their whole story was, the church thought they were crazy and censured them, and then they found out they were right. Sometimes they were already dead, and then they're like, oh, you know what? That guy was totally right. Or, oh, you know what? That guy was doing miracles. Yeah, we'll allow him to do ministry again. But in the moment, until that unfolds, I'm going to be faithful to the church. I'm going to be faithful to my superiors, even down to my priests, right? Like, I'm a lay person, and I know I have an online ministry. Like, I do online, like, apologetics stuff. But I have told my priest, if you see me say something that you think I shouldn't have said, you tell me and I'll take it down. Same thing of my bishop, obviously, and same thing of the Vatican. Like, if I got a letter from the Vatican saying delete your channel, I would delete my channel. Some people wouldn't. Obviously, if you don't have an online apostolate, that's different. You might not have that exact scenario, but same thing. Like, you can never go wrong by being obedient, even when obedience is painful, and you will be rewarded for it. But that's, especially if you are coming from Protestantism, that's a very hard thing to understand. But I would point to, just last thing I'll say is, if you look at Christ's ministry, he comes at a time in perhaps one of the greatest crises in the Old Testament ministerial system. They don't have a king. They're being ruled by a foreign nation. A couple hundred years prior, we had the Maccabean revolt, which was the last great hope of the Jewish people to have their kingdom and be independent, and that failed. And now you have this priestly crisis where there are a lot of people thinking that the temple is corrupt. They're not sure about the orthodoxy of their priests. And guess what? They were right, because they were Sadducees. But what does Christ say? He doesn't say, yeah, we just need to get away from them and go do our own thing over here. He says, oh, I just healed you. What does the law require of you? That you go to the temple, that you be cleansed, that you make this tithe and offering. He still commands obedience to that system in the midst of it, perhaps its greatest crisis in the old covenant. Even though he's there about to usher in the new covenant, until that moment strikes, he's still asking people, look, the Sadducees are corrupt, so much so that he didn't even deal with them. He says, you don't know the scriptures or the power of God, but they're the spiritual authority. They have the priesthood. You still have to be obedient to that. And he even says about the Pharisees, who sit on some of them sit on the Sanhedrin, which is like the judicial authority. He even says they sit in the seat of Moses. So do what they say. Just don't do what they do, because they're hypocrites. And so, like, if my bishop tells me to do something, yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean he can't be a hypocrite. My bishop's not. I have a good bishop. I'm really blessed. But some people have a bad bishop. Some people have a hypocritical bishop. Some people even have bishops that privately might hold unorthodox opinions. But we don't do what they do, but we do have to do what they say.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess one more, like, I guess my suggestion in times like this, whenever it comes to leadership, is that right now, if you're coming into the church, on the 19th, or as XJW Laura says, she's getting, but if you're getting baptized and confirmed, you get on, So May 10th is I guess another date in some dioceses for whatever reason. One thing that I would recommend there is that in this neophyte time, you might think that you're super advanced because, you watch Pines with Aquinas or Council of Trent, or, maybe you're a little bit more advanced and you're watching Christian Wagner and stuff like that. That's all fine and good, but you really need to be focusing on the basics right now. Yes, you might have the best apologetic arguments. Oh, hey, thanks, Eric. I appreciate that, dude. Thanks for the super chat. Really appreciate it. Just focus on the basics, though. It's I want you to ask yourselves, like, before you start, like, trying to comment on this, like, really advanced stuff, such as church politics, have you gone cover to cover with scripture yet? That's, there's so many times, like, people say, like, oh, this is so bad. This is so bad. This is the worst time in the church ever. And I'm like, bro, have you read the Book of Kings? Like, my goodness, you want to talk about bad leaders, like, or judges, for instance. Oh my goodness. Like, those are some real serious crises. So it really helps put into perspective of these. So go cover to cover with scripture. You are not too good for Bible in the Air with Father Mike Schmitz. I highly recommend it. A lot of really good stuff in there. And I love this here. I'd rather be able to feel contrition than to be able to define it. I love that.
Bingo.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Go cover to cover with scripture. Learn what's going on at the Mass. Understand what's really happening there. The sacrificial nature of it. And actually, I'll pull this one back up again. One thing that I didn't do for a very long time was learn how to go to confession well. Because I don't know about y'all, but, like, I had, like, zero formation. It was just like, hey, you're going to do your first confession. Actually, no, it wasn't even that, because I was getting baptized. So I didn't have to do a first confession. My first confession was at a Steubenville South conference, because I grabbed the priest that we were with. It's like, hey, can I go to confession? And we, like, went out to, like, the field outside, and I was just like, hey, Father, this is my first confession since my baptism. Walk me through this. He was very laid back, very gentle, but, like, okay, yeah, that's fine, like, in terms of an emergency room, but if you want to like really take the sacrament seriously, dive into that, do all this stuff, and then don't get angry whenever you see that other people aren't doing this too.
Right.
So that's something that I would say is like, you're going to learn so much, but like, don't get angry that others aren't doing this. That this is, the phrase there, but by the grace of God, go I. So
Yeah.
that would be my recommendation, is just get the basics down pat. Because whenever I was going to an Institute of Christ the King oratory, I was going to the Latin Mass, I understood it. And then yet every time our French priest got up there to talk about the basics of the faith, he was blowing my mind because he was saying things for the first time that I'd never heard before. And at this time I'd been Catholic for like 10 years. And it's just like, oh snap. I never got a firm foundation. Like, so anyway, that,
I overall, just kind of on that point, a lot of people entering the church now, like I mentioned earlier, their head is gonna be far ahead of their heart, in that the access to the information, like the content of the faith, is so prolific, and it's being so well done by all the creators out there. It's amazing. Like no other time in history has it been like this, and we're gonna see the fruits of that. It's gonna be amazing. The concern is, and this is what I lived through, is when your head and your heart don't match, your head's going to want to go far, fast. And like you said, your heart isn't even used to the basics. I mean, I took a full year and a half of just learning how to, participate in the mass, pray, go to confession, get used to like the rosary, the whole Mary thing. Because honestly, like my head was there, but my heart was still like, bro, this kind of feels weird. That's going to take some breaking in. And honestly, like if you move to a new place for a new job, you don't immediately apply for like a board position and dive into volunteer work and then start getting, you might, like some people are that way, but most of us are like, bro, I need 6 months to get my footing. Well, when you become Catholic, you might know all the stuff and like know like, oh, this is the argument that convinced me and here's the history of the church, but you haven't lived as a Catholic. And the big distinction about Catholicism is that we're not just passing on a bullet list of doctrines that's longer and has more historical precedent. We're passing on the very life of Christ himself as handed down through the apostles, through sacred scripture, and through the living tradition of the church. And that's all of those work in tandem. It takes a little bit of time for your metronome to sync up with the metronome of the church in your life. Honestly, there are days, and I'm in this season right now, Lent has been wrecking me. I'm in the church, what is it, 4 years now? There are still times I find my metronome going at the wrong beat. There are still ways in which I'm like, man, maybe I shouldn't have started making content quite yet because I'm still not fully there. There are still little inklings of Protestantism in me that I'm finding, that I'm having to go, whoa, this is different. That's not how we do things here,
Yeah.
So that's an adjustment period. And I think for me, I'm glad that I took like at least a year and a half. It was just shy of 2 before I started doing anything publicly. And we started doing stuff in the church in our parish a little before then. But even still, we took like a solid like 7 or 8 months before we even discussed doing that, just to kind of get our footing, get used to it, get into the rhythm of the church calendar, holy days of obligation, mass on Sundays, the sacraments, going to confession and all of that. Give yourself some grace in that period. It's an adjustment. It's going to be a roller coaster. And last thing I'll say on that, and we can move on to something else, is it's not going to be how you expected. And that's probably a good point, is like, I don't know about you, Kyle, but when I was confirmed, it wasn't as though I suddenly had this heavenly moment and like light shone down upon me and suddenly everything in my life was great. For me, my life got a lot harder. We had a lot of personal challenges, a lot of marital challenges, not like between my wife and I, but just circumstances. A lot of life stuff happened. And I don't think it was a mistake. It happened really hard on the way going in. And that was the devil trying to keep us out. And then afterwards, more stuff like that happened, sometimes directly to do with our conversion, sometimes seemingly unrelated, but I would say still spiritual warfare, trying to say you made the wrong decision, you should go back. Be prepared for that and give yourself some time and some grace, because it's like you basically just opened yourself up to the deepest level of heart surgery. You're not going to go play in the NFL the next day.
Right. Yeah. No, it's yeah, there's a lot there. the challenges are certainly going to be there, which kind of like leads me into my second point. You know, a lot of times, and not always, a lot of times after you're brought into the church, you are coming in with you're on fire. You know, you feel a lot of stuff. You know, you feel like you could convert the world. You know, you're going to be the next saints who nobody's ever heard of, whose feast day is on July 12th. You know, you're going to do all these amazing things, and yet, like that's good, and that is a gift from God. But make no mistake, that is a gift. And
Right.
if you read The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis, that gift will eventually be withdrawn, and you're going to experience some spiritual dryness. And this is the time where it's very important to remember that
Are you reading the? I don't know how much you know about fire,
but don't be on it. Shane Smith.
Epic.
That derailed everything. But anyway, no. So, but you're going to experience some spiritual dryness. Thomas à Kempis talks about this in The Imitation of Christ, about how that's like kind of the next phase. And you think about like when you're training children, like, you know, I'm a dad, I've got little kids, I got 2 in diapers right now. What do you do for potty training? Well, you know, the first few times they do it, you always like give them a treat, you know, the first little thing, because you don't want them to quit right off the bat. Guess what? We are God's stupid children, and he's going to give us the same thing. He's going to be giving us these treats early on, but once we kind of grow, well, okay, now it's time to see if you can do this without the treats. It's very important to remember that God's not a feeling, and just because you don't feel anything, that doesn't mean that he's not there or that you're doing something wrong. You know, there's an entire book, you know, entitled, you know, Saint John of the Cross, The Dark Night of the Soul. So you might experience that sometime soon. Personally, I kind of went through something like that during essentially my entire 6 years while I was in active duty. You know, I was brought into the church. Everything was great. I was doing all these amazing things. Then I graduated high school. Then I went to Steubenville South, and it was great, and I loved it. And then everything kind of got stripped away from me. I didn't have this Catholic community anymore. I was going to mass on Sundays, but I'd kind of graduated out of the youth group, and I didn't know how to interact with anybody. And it was really tough. It was really tough. So I guess expect something like that.
Yeah, that's all really good stuff. One thing I wish I would have known first as well, kind of speaking to everything we've spoken to a little bit. So there's a few things, I guess. One is that I guess the heartbeat of everything we're saying so far is focus once you come in, and even before. So like, if you're like, yo, I'm not coming in until next year or whatever, you know, everyone's got to, you might watch this 6 months from now. Start focusing on spiritual formation now. Yesterday was the best time. Today's the next best time. I'll get to it tomorrow because I'm an awful sinner. But like, I remember probably 6 months after becoming Catholic, I read Introduction to the Devout Life by St. Francis de Sales. And I was like, bro, this is not an introduction. This is a master class. If this is the introduction, then this well goes very deep. And I'm going to have to revisit that book, because I the first third of it, I was like, yeah, cool. The second third and the third, I was like, I'm not even there yet, bro. I am not even there. Yeah. And that's a lifelong journey. Like, you know, people have told me this about marriage. A lot of people prep for marriage, like the wedding date is the end goal, but dying is the end goal. Like, you get married, that's the beginning. Making it until death do us part is the actual goal. The same is absolutely true of the church. That's why marriage is the primary analogy that they use between Christ and the church, is that he's the groom and we're the bride, because you're not there for the wedding when you come into the church. You're there for the wedding feast of the Lamb at the end of days, with the final resurrection, when you resurrect in glory with the saints for an eternal reward. That is at death. Like, you're entering the preparation for dying well like a Christian. It does not end when they put that oil on your forehead and when you receive the host. That's the beginning. And it is like warfare in a sense. Like, you might have just signed up and you're excited to go let's talk to you after your first couple battles, because it's only going to get crazier, and you have to have the long game in mind. I think having that preparation and having an aim and an eyesight on spiritual formation is something I didn't spend enough time on, because I'm a pretty intellectual person. I neglected the heart part of it way too much. And as a nerd I know once said, who's on this stream, if your relationship with God is how much you know about him, you don't have a relationship with him, you're stalking him. Kyle said that. It's a great line. I steal it all the time, but it's so true. If you know lots of facts about the faith, but you're not actively working on how you live it and express it and engage with it, then yeah, you're not in love with God. You're stalking him. So don't be a stalker. That's creepy.
Yeah.
Don't be parasocial.
Well, and having a parasocial relationship with God. The other thing is, like, if the faith was merely an intellectual venture, Satan would be the best Christian. Satan knows more theology than you. Satan knows all the best apologetic arguments. Satan's got everything. He knows apologetic arguments that haven't even been formulated by humans yet, and they're way better than anything we can come up with. And guess what? Yeah, like, he ain't in heaven. So, that's going to be one thing that you're going to want to learn to check is your pride. And, the way you grow in humility is by humiliation, and it's not fun. It's not great, but your pride's your most worthless thing that you have. So you see an opportunity to offload some of it, get rid of it. But yeah, growing in love, charity, which I guess also, like, I don't have this on my list, but it's something good. I don't know about you, but definitely me, because I converted as an arrogant 18-year-old. I was a total jerk to everybody that wasn't Catholic, and I had all the best arguments, and I could argue anybody into the faith. Spoiler alert, that didn't work, not even once. So, and in fact, like, I was so awful to my parents that, like, only recently is my mom, like, kind of having conversations with me about this. And honestly, that wasn't even me. That was because she called me and said, "Hey, have you heard about this Hallow app? My best friend started praying a daily rosary, and she's been jazzing it up and talking it up, and I'm thinking about starting it." And at that moment, all my criticisms of Hallow just died, because it was like, these guys reached my mom in a way that I couldn't. But anyway,
yeah, I think that's huge. One thing I learned, I forget where I heard it from, and I just started practicing it because, again, I was very eager. Everyone has kind of that cage stage where you're like, I just want to tell everybody. That's beautiful, and never lose that. I try not to lose that, and it always comes up anew. But strategy is important when it comes to evangelism. It's very important, like this is war. You don't go into battle if you just Leroy Jenkins into there, you're going to get destroyed. That's why that meme is funny, because we know that's what's going to happen next, is he's going to get obliterated. So strategy is important. And with strategy of, like, how do you approach those conversations? That is a human being, man. You're not there to win an argument. You're there, to win a soul. And that doesn't happen through brute force argumentation. That happens through relationship and trust, especially in person. And that's where, like, I don't care how many content creators there are. We're just there to fill in the information when someone can't talk to you. But everyone that I've had the pleasure of seeing into the church would try to talk to me first, because they knew me and they trusted me. And then they made use of resources when that wasn't practical or possible. And then at some point, people get really interested and go on a deep dive. And there's a whole funnel to it. But that door never opens if they don't have an encounter with you that's positive, that leads them to open that door of curiosity. And then what Kyle just said is perfect. Sometimes it's not going to be you. And for a while, it might not be you. And that might be frustrating. Like, there's a lot of people I know who have come into the church who I was like, oh, I'll get that person. And it had nothing to do with me. Like you said, it was something else that they heard, that they saw. But the one thing that I heard early on that I constantly do is, you can offer up your prayers, your sufferings, and your mass intentions for those people. And they don't have to know about it, but it will bear fruit. And I mean, I hesitate to say it because it's like, I can't guarantee the same results for everybody, but there has not been one person so far that, if I consistently offer up my intentions of the mass when I'm attending mass for them, if I do that consistently for like a year or more and just keep doing it, there's not one person so far that hasn't come into the church. And usually a lot of times I'm just doing that and then stuff starts to happen and I'm like, see, this is crazy because I'm not even actively doing anything like in real life, but I am praying for that person.
Yeah.
And I've got all my buddies doing this, man, and it's crazy. Like when the priest is starting to say the Eucharistic prayer, I just start praying silently for people. Like, God, I get to participate in the sacrifice of the Mass. I want this to be offered for the intention of this person's conversion or for this thing. That's a really powerful thing. I mean, it's the most powerful prayer there is. It's the Mass. Get in the habit of doing that. And honestly, when you're having a tough season, dude, I've been offering it for myself recently. I'm like, God, I need help, dude.
Yeah.
This is for me. I need you to help me. That's been huge. And I can't tell you how powerful it's been in my life. And then when stuff happens, when you see God move, make a note of those, because when you get to that dry season, like Kyle talked about, you get to that dark night of the soul. In the book of Joshua tells the people of Israel when they cross the river, they're going to build a monument, and they stack stones and build a monument. And that's to remember that Israel crossed into the land, across the river Jordan to the land this day. The reason you have to build those monuments is so that when you're in a desert again and you feel like you're back in the wilderness, you can be reminded of crossing the river. You need those in your own life. Where have you seen God move along the way into conversion and after? Make note of those, write them down, and revisit them, because there's going to come a time. I was just talking to a seminarian the other day who said this. He's going into his kind of turning the corner. He's got, I think, 3 years left, so he's getting close, right? And he's like, yeah, I'm in a really dark season. And what I've been doing is reminding myself of all the things along the way that have shown me this is God's path, because right now Satan's trying to take me off of it. That's going to happen to all of us. So make those memorials, remember those moments, and write them down. I have a list, dude, and I go back to that list. And I just look at them, and I just remember, oh yeah, this, and this. Nope, I'm in the right place.
Yeah, and that's So, and it just whenever it starts to argue, I loved what Josiah had to say about this. It was just apologetics is not politics. The goal is not to win. Not to win the argument, but to win the soul. And you're gonna get a lot further by loving the person, by being a very good friend, and praying and fasting and whatnot. So the third point I wanna go into is we kind of touched on this a little bit with your talking about like the metronome of the church, and how it's going to take some time to do that. You are stepping into a tradition that is still pretty foreign to you. And effectively you're coming out of Egypt and you're in the desert right now. But you're still trying to live it out. But, a friend of mine at church recently said something that, if you're coming into the faith, you were not handed this tradition, you found it. And now you're trying your best. And I can tell you, as a father of 5, I wasn't raised Catholic. I don't know what, I've never lived through the experience of raising good Catholic kids that stay in the church. I don't know what that looks like. My parents didn't do that for me. So I'm kind of like just going like hand to mouth here, like just, here, let me take this and give it to my kids as I'm learning it. Your goal in the generational, like your generational role is to die in the desert. You might become a really great person. You might be like a Scott Hahn, but like a little bit, your job is to die in the desert. You will never forget the flesh pots of Egypt. God willing, here's hoping that you won't yearn for them anymore, but you can never forget them. Your children, on the other hand, they never experience them. They're the first ones in your generational line that's actually going to be brought up in this tradition. And that's tough. We see so many problems going on in the church and everything. And, we had a conversation about this in Discord today, that it seems that our role is to just endure, hang on, and raise. Oh, my camera's back. Okay. Is to, I don't know why it's doing this, but whatever. It's just endure, hang on, raise good sons who will go on to become good priests. A few of those will go on to become good bishops, good cardinals, and maybe a good pope one day. But like the church isn't a democracy. So yes, your bishop might be doing something that's making you angry, but like, what do? It was like, well, you suffer. You know, you might be one of those blessed few people that have the ear of your bishop that, you know, maybe he could listen to your input. Chances are, though, if you're watching this, you're probably not that guy.
Also, what a terrifying position to be in. I don't want that responsibility.
Yeah. No, it's terrifying. You know, not everybody can be, you know, Saint Catherine of Siena or, yeah. So, yeah, or you may not have a bishop. Yeah, I wonder anybody like that. So, yeah. Well, once again, like that goes back to like church leadership will fail you, but you know, the way that I see that where we are in the church right now is that we're still recovering from the 70s. You know, a lot of stuff happened, a lot of mass confusion, chaos. And right now, the people who are really in charge of the church, a lot of those guys are the people who kind of thought that all that mass chaos was a good idea. No pun intended. But, and that's going to continue to be the case as long as they're in charge. But nobody lives forever. So,
yeah.
Anyway, our role here is to essentially die in the desert. What we're building isn't for us; it's for our children and for our grandchildren.
Bro, this stream is like, hey kids, everything's on fire. Come in. I think there are positives though. I think that we have, you know, with great trial comes great opportunity. And I'll be honest, like when I read about the good times in the church, I know myself, I wouldn't have been a good Catholic in the good times. I would have been lazy. Yeah. And, you know, maybe the reason you guys were all born to live in this moment is because God knows that, and what he has planned for us will be much more effective in the current crucible than it would be in a time of like great, you know, great Catholic renewal. To have the opportunity to plant the seeds that become that, what a gift for your children, what a gift for future people. And honestly, like there's some reward that comes with that. But I will say, like in a positive note, like, oh man, you guys are telling us about all this scary stuff.
Well, I mean, the title is a warning to new Catholic converts.
I would say the positive thing that you can do that will reap more rewards than anything is learn how to celebrate. Ars celebrandi. Learn how to, you know, we are coming out of modernism. Much of what you said leads into that, even in the church in an experiential way. What modernism has stripped us of is the art of celebration and what that actually means. And I think that's what I see that grieves my heart the most is like, okay, yeah, we could talk about preference and dogma and doctrine and technical stuff and church politics, but really the young people who are coming into the church are yearning for an art of celebration that was stripped from us. And that's what we're really talking about is like in all of its pomp and glory, what does it actually mean to worship? Now, the parish you go to might not be the expression you ultimately want of that right now. And so, okay, if you live in a city where there's a better one, maybe you discern that for the sake of your children, you go to that better one. I don't have the luxury of having multiple. I live in a place where there's one. Maybe you're in a place where like, you know what? I want to stay and fight and help this place grow. Don't do that by being a bulldog, but actually actively participate in the mass properly yourself. Be obedient, of course, but enter into the art of celebration, enter into it and do it honestly and earnestly, and people will notice. And don't do it for the people to notice, do it for yourself. But I think most people approach the liturgy as this middle school play, this role that they play, and they say the lines, they say them proudly and loudly, and they do their part, and then they just kind of move on. But it's so much more than that. And most of us don't even know what that means. Most of us don't even know what active participation actually looks like because we're in a culture that doesn't do that with anything. I mean, the most ornate thing we have is like a presidential inauguration, and it's American democracy. It is not monarchism. It's not, there is no, you know what I mean? There's like hand on a Bible, say a few lines, people clap and take a photo when we go home. We have no pomp and circumstance in our culture anymore. And there's a reason that ancient cultures developed all that. There's a reason it belongs in the mass. And even individually, you can learn, even in a really poorly done liturgy, you can learn to enter into that contemplative space of active participation in the mass. And you have no idea what that does for your soul, but also just like what it does to please God. Dom's gonna kill me for butchering it, but in the spirit of the liturgy, which is like the book on this, the spirit of the liturgy by Pope Benedict, Cardinal Ratzinger, he talks about that if we do the liturgy as though it's about us, we might as well be building a golden calf. And I think for me, that was the biggest thing to learn. And even in the positive, like if I'm like, oh, well, I want to do this because I prefer a more traditional option, you could make that a golden calf if you do it wrong. But if you're actually discerning what is happening here and you're contemplative, you understand it, and you're entering into it, I'm going to be honest, it's going to look more traditional. It just naturally goes that way. Sue me. But you're not doing it because you like it or because you think it's right. Because let's be honest, that's what the libcaths do. They change things because they like it. It's about them. And if the liturgy is focused on you, is it worshiping God? Now technically, yes. Like if the Eucharist is validly confected, yes, it's the Mass. But like, what's your role in it? Are you there for God or are you there for you?
Yeah, man, yeah. A lot there. My goodness.
That's all I got, man.
Yeah, no, dude, that's so good. But yeah, like all of this is just good advice. Just I guess something that like I wish I had somebody that could have explained this to me. One thing I do want to point out though is that we talked about content creators. Both of you and I are creators. A ton of our friends are creators, but the faith is not to be exclusively lived online. It's got to come out into the real world. Just like whenever you're dating. Online dating, you meet somebody online. It's like, okay, what's one of your first goals? Well, one of your first goals is to, meet up in person. So, you want to have that encounter. But don't just pound away at the keyboard, arguing with people or, dropping slurs or whatever. And I guess that's part of going cover to cover with scripture, because what is it? Gospel of Matthew. I don't know the chapter and verse, but it's talking about how, we'll be held accountable for every careless word that we utter. So, and the internet's forever. So, you drop something on there, even if you do delete it, you're still gonna be held accountable for that. So, yeah. I'm not putting that up on the screen, but that's funny, Josiah. But yeah, and I guess the last point that I have here, which is not structured at all, is that you will be changed after Saturday. Life is never going to go back to being the same after you are brought into the church, either by baptism or confirmation or just being received. You will be changed, but your friends and family won't be, at least not immediately. So be patient with them. And also understand that your primary relationship is with God. Christ is King. And that demands things of you. And that might mean that some relationships are going to go away. Or at least they might take a pause. That doesn't mean stop praying for these people. That doesn't mean whatever. It's gonna take some time for everybody to do that. So be patient with them. The way that you grow in these virtues is by exercising them. So, the way that you grow in patience is that you are in situations that require patience. The way you grow in humility is you be humiliated. The way you grow in chastity is by being chaste. So yeah, this is going to be probably going to be one of your first tests of patience. I would also recommend, I guess, also if you can, if your priest has the capacity for it, or if you have the capacity for it, find a good spiritual director, because you're going to find a lot of advice online, and most of it is hot trash. Most of it is bad.
This whole stream included.
Yeah. Most of it's not great. A lot of the takes that I worked myself into such a tizzy, just being on like Latin Mass Facebook groups. It was, man, I love the Latin Mass. No, I don't want anybody to like get that confused. But at one point, I was so worried about, is my priest's are his holy orders, are they valid? And how can I tell? It's like, oh, so and so online said that only priests from this bishop and and coming from his line, oh, they're the only ones that are valid. And I was so worried about that. And then I thank God I talked to my priest, and he was basically like, you need to ignore all that nonsense. If you have questions, you can come to me. Or go to the catechism, etc. And even with stuff that's like really good, you might be thinking that, we talked about introduction to the spiritual, introduction to the devout life, St. Francis de Sales. That could be a great starting point for you, or you might fool yourself into thinking that you're more advanced than you actually are, and you start reading St. Alphonsus Liguori. That may be a little too much for you. So that's that's something that it's really good to have that human touch. And you're going to want to talk to your priest, and that's going to be one of the best resources for you. Your parish priest, assuming that he's good, which not all of them are, which is just a sad reality that we live in right now. But I would always recommend going to your parish priest first before you turn to an internet priest, because if he ever watches this, he spends way too much time online. But I'll call out Father Chad Ripperger, which I know people who know him personally, talked with him on a regular basis, and they assure me that he is a very, very good and holy man who, some things that he says gets a little twisted online, but that wasn't his intention. And the sad thing about YouTube and X and all these things is that the things that you say that sound crazy, that's the stuff that goes viral. You try to correct that, 300 views. Nobody's ever going to see that. So that's the danger of like listening to somebody like Father Chad Ripperger, who's talking to his congregation. He's talking to people who are there with him, and if they're confused, they can ask a question of like, "Hey, what did you mean by that? That sounded like this thing." And then he goes, "Oh no, that's not what I meant. I meant it this way." And then things get corrected, and everybody's all the better for it. You can't do that online with a recording of a priest who has a lot of good things to offer, but you just I don't want to say take it with a grain of salt. There's a lot of good stuff out there, but he's not your priest unless you're one of the blessed few that's able to be in part of his regular congregation. So that would just be, my advice is try not to go off on your own. Try not to like come up with your own plan for spiritual development. Find somebody who's more advanced with you. Hopefully that's your parish priest, and work with him.
Ditto.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. We are coming up on the hour though. So if there are any questions, feel free to, you sent me something in the private chat. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Anyway, if there's any questions, happy to answer them. Drew, do you have any like final thoughts?
Man, enjoy it too. Like,
oh yeah.
Again, it's like a lot of people are like, yeah, I want to go fast, go to the next thing, advance. Dude, just enjoy it. Like, really contemplate the meaning of the Eucharist and what is that? Like, are you kidding me? Like, Jesus is actually here. You can never, ever outgrow that contemplation. And so I think to start, that's like, just like when you're going up to receive the Eucharist, just realize what's actually happening. And just that practice alone, and just dwelling on that and contemplating what that even means, that could be a whole lifetime right there. So just enjoy it.
Yeah. I guess that's a good final thought, because like, we've given you all the doom and gloom, but anybody who's married knows that marriage is tough. Mm-hmm. So, but when you're at your wedding, man, that's the time to party. Mm-hmm. Yes, you are going to have struggles. Yes. Okay, that's all fine and good. But right now is the time to celebrate. So don't forget that. after, you go to the Easter Vigil, man, party it up within reason. Obviously, like, that's not the time to, try to drink an entire keg in one sitting, but
Minimum of 3 cigars, though, ordered
do
from
what?
Chester. Minimum of 3 cigars
Yeah,
ordered
minimum
from
of 3
Chesterton's.
cigars. Even you ladies.
Yeah.
Sorry if you don't
Yeah.
smoke, but
You gotta pick it up. It's required.
yeah,
Someone
I
asked
think if
earlier.
you don't smoke at least 3 cigars after you're confirmed, it's actually not valid. So
Yeah, you gotta redo it. Yeah.
even for kids, it's I don't make the rules.
They'd be
Well,
puking.
any shots that we had of monetizing are gone.
Gone.
So
No, the YouTube reviewer will not watch this part. That's fine.
okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, if you guys want to join the community, we've got the Discord link. It's just discord.gg/ipsumaudite. That is the yeah, there we go. So it's on this side. Okay. Dang. Okay. All right. Yeah. Discord.gg/ipsumaudite. Hopefully the link is in the description. It might be. It's free to join the server. Just get verified and you can start interacting with me, Drew. We're pretty active in there. And there's a bunch of other creators in there, especially if you're a content creator. Come on in there. We offer collaboration, development, etc. I mean, just
Memes.
just today there was a guy in there, and I won't say either name, but there was somebody who's not in the server that was trying to get a hold of a guy that was in our server, and the guy that was trying to do that, like, dude's got an account with like over 100,000 followers, and he's like, hey, do you know how to get a hold of this guy? And we were able to make that connection. So if you're looking to collaborate more, hop in the server, and yeah. And we do have at least one autist in there who will help you develop a thicker skin. So yes.
I know who he's talking about.
I don't know who I'm talking about.
No.
Anyway, that's all that I've got for now. I don't see any questions. So hey, for all of you who stuck around this long, thanks for watching, especially the 42 of you who are currently watching live. That might be a new record for me. So yeah, that's all I have. So we're just gonna end the stream. I don't even know.